The Burros of Berea is a conversational podcast. We study the Bible and we talk about it.
Not all of us are of the same faith, and one of us doesn't actually have a faith.
And that's wonderful. We all love one another, and we're going to continue to talk about these things.
The things we believe in and the things we believe about what we read in the Bible. Not all of these are necessarily true. Some of it is opinion and speculation. Thank you for
listening and speculating with us.
There you go. That was good. Yes.
You are listening to the Burros of Berea.
Side studies.
Well, welcome back to the Burros of Berea. I don't know, is this a side study, Andy?
Let's say yes. I don't know either. Really, it's just Rick tells me what to tag. It's just very little difference. There's like a couple seconds of audio.
You've been tagged.
Yeah.
Well, as you probably guessed, I am not the podfather, the OG Rick Welch. He is absent today. Can you believe that? He's never absent unless he's got the COVID.
Be here at 7.
Yeah. Well, no, he comes when he has COVID.
Oh,
too.
he does? Okay, that's true.
That's just us, ladies.
It's just us, ladies. And to my left is Cherry, the Annihilator Lewis.
Hello.
With her cute little haircut.
Thanks, guys.
How was your trip?
It was good.
Good.
It was good, yeah.
Good.
You did get the invite, correct? On this trip?
I did get the invite,
good.
yes. But I'm talking about her trip out west.
Yeah, to teach Vacation Bible School.
She went on a mission trip
that's
to
right.
the,
You were talking about
the
that.
reservation, right?
That was this past week or?
It's
3 weeks ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
You didn't mention it while we were on our trip this past weekend.
Mm-mm.
And to Cherry's left is Billy I Candy Kimsey.
You may want a piece of bubble gum, but you'll want all of Billy Yum. Oopsie.
Did you pull that one out of your
No.
Back door?
Yeah.
Your back door?
My back door. Nice. Did it stink that bad? So anyway,
Wasn't as bad as Rick's jokes.
that's true.
And across from me is Rick, Big Daddy Carter,
Oh, yeah.
who enjoyed the beach this weekend.
I did.
Per his social media feed.
I did.
And next
in
to
the
him
sand.
is Ralph, straight out of Compton.
Represent.
And then behind the glass, who's never last, is Andy Rocketman Bishop.
He was last will be first.
That's right. Look at him quoting
Look at
scripture.
that. Yes,
Wow.
I'm impressed, Andy.
Yeah, I know 3 or 4 verses by accident.
Jesus wept. That's one. There's one. Okay.
That's the biggest one.
That's the biggest one. Yes, that's a big one. It's a little big one, big little one. So it's been on my heart for a little bit of time to talk about some things that may be a little tough. So just to kind of give you a background, I have been having these weird dreams. And so somebody told me to, when you wake up, to write them down because they felt different than regular dreams. Anybody ever had dreams like that where they just feel real? They feel...
I don't have real dreams. I have the most absurd dreams
No.
ever. Though I have been remembering dreams lately, which I don't usually do. But
My husband never remembers a dream, like ever.
I almost never do. It's really rare.
But mine, I wake up and I'm visibly agitated, in a panic mode, and they're usually some sort of rescue. Now, when it started when the Afghanistan withdrawal thing happened, I guess, 2 years ago now?
Wow.
And so I've just kind of been writing them down and not sure what to do with that, but it's always somebody who is in a crisis or who is suffering, who is in some sort of trauma that needs deliverance. And it's a different version of it. It's never the same. The theme is always the same.
People you know?
Sometimes.
Oh, really? Okay.
Sometimes, and sometimes it's strangers, and a lot of times it's children. So I've just been kind of I don't write down great detail. I just write down sort of the theme. So a lot of it came from people who were suffering some trauma. And so those people in this room know that my family has experienced some trauma in the past year, and Ralph and I've talked a lot about that because we've experienced some similar traumas in our family and some suffering. It might not be trauma, but it's trauma. It's traumatic.
It is. It's PTSD effects from that.
Yes. And so I want to talk a little bit about suffering today. And maybe it might be 2 parts because it's pretty in-depth, but since I left my list of Bible verses at home, it might not be as in-depth as it was planning on it to be. But it's not a fun topic for anybody, but it's not a topic that any of us gets to skip. There's not one of us who hasn't experienced some kind of trauma, some kind of disease. We all just lived through COVID-19 and all the junk that came with it, whether you believe in it one way or the other. We all lived through the same thing. Now, Rick Carter and I were in different states, so it was a little bit different. But none of us were California. None of us were New York, places like that, places where the death count was pretty massive. And so we all have had a touch of this. And so I wanted to talk about what is suffering. So anybody on the cast, what is suffering to you?
Oof, that's such a big word.
It
it's
is.
Like, how do you even start? Because there's so many things. And of course, it'd be different for different people, at least in degree. But it really encompasses a lot of like misfortune, or just, a lot of people have great suffering that is almost entirely in their own head. You know what I mean? It's not born of circumstance, of course, plenty of, but a lot of people experience real traumatic suffering that is born almost entirely in their head. And then there's the kind of, external suffering, which, when things happen to family members or physical things happen to yourself, or, what I mean, a disappointment in yourself or other people. I mean, God, it's just, where do you even start?
Well, that's a great point. Actually, it's like you've been reading Psychology Today. So that was actually on site. There's 2 different levels of suffering. One is a mental, emotional anguish, and another one is a physical anguish. For the most part, the kinds of physical anguish, most people I didn't know this until I did some research. America has never had a significant famine.
Well, that's interesting.
Isn't that pretty amazing?
Yeah, at least not since in the records of the white man, as it were.
That is,
Yeah.
I'm in America as a colony, group of colonies, or a country. We've never had a famine, so we haven't really had to deal with that kind of suffering with hunger. For most of us, there are people who go hungry in our country, of course.
Right, but not epidemically.
Not epidemically. We've had the Spanish flu, which was 1918, and we've had COVID-19, which was 2020. I'm sure there have been other epidemics, but nothing like the Spanish flu was pretty deadly as far as that goes. But we haven't had any real, other than those 2 epidemics.
Polio was crazy.
Yes, it was.
Polio was like so bad.
Was it?
Yeah, before the vaccine, it was just and it's,
that eradicated pretty much.
Yeah.
Though it's popping up in places, but
yeah, but
it's
you
making
know why
erratic.
it's popping up though.
Yeah.
We had the bird flu.
That a pan?
Yeah, I don't know that
It doesn't hit the scale.
numbers. Yeah, it doesn't hit the
The
numbers.
swine
necessarily.
flu was another one that
Yeah,
that
those bad flus happen
Yeah.
was
every
almost-
once in a while, for sure.
So in the Bible, Paul talks about the thorn in his flesh that he asks God to remove, which everybody has their speculation on what that is. It's some kind of suffering. He wants it to be removed. And then we also hear, so people will say, gosh, that's such a thorn in the flesh. We get that term. Another one you'll hear from Christians, and what we like to call Christianese, is to take up your cross and follow Jesus. And I got to thinking, is that what that really means? Does take up your cross mean take up your burden?
I think a lot of people associate it with burden, but I don't think that's
Yeah,
what, I don't think
seems
that's really
like it
what
would
it
be.
is. I mean, it is a burden because it's work. This is what I want you to do. It's a calling, and it is work, and it does be. I think how other people treat you makes it a burden, but I don't think you have to internalize that.
Another Christianese would be we need to suffer for Christ. It's another thing we've been told, and it can be debated about what that text means in itself too.
What was that? I don't know people's names. I don't know my own name sometimes, but guy we had on our last podcast was talking about the
Jim-
opposite of that.
Jim
like
Brewer?
how
Is it John
John-
Paul?
John Paul,
John
I
Paul.
think, was talking about like how
The grace guy?
how often am I going to put Christ back on the cross for myself kind
Yeah.
of thing, like the inverse of that.
Well, that actually brings me to one of my first points is our society, our modern day society, kind of almost idolizes the cross. People wear cross necklaces. You have them in your homes. I don't know that idolizing it like we're worshiping it, but we see it as a symbol of hope. We see it as a symbol of forgiveness, mercy, atonement, grace, sacrifice. And that's our modern thinking. But what we in this room like to do is put the cross back to what the people of the Bible would have thought of it. So what would the people of the Bible have thought of the cross? Would they have thought of grace, mercy,
Roman
atonement?
torture device, 100%.
A part of the machine.
Roman torture device. For instance, if the words electric chair or firing squad or a guillotine or a noose, those conjure up images of horrific trauma, right?
Yeah, death. Yeah.
Death.
Yeah.
And that's what would have. So when Jesus uttered those words, now he hadn't been up on the cross, but they all knew what it was. When he said, "Take up your cross," they had walked the roads where they were literally on the side of the road. Sometimes it took them days, maybe a week, to die. And that's what they would have thought. It wouldn't have been necessarily a burden. And that got me thinking, like, why do we make it into a burden or an illness or something we have to carry? We've made it that way in our society, and I didn't really have an answer for that.
A lot of times it's something that just gets coined. Somebody says something, somebody else thinks about it and agrees, and then they repeat it because we have all kinds of sayings, and everyone's always looking, where did that come from, or where did that one come from? And it's usually something obscure, and a lot of times doesn't have anything to do with the original meaning.
And that's true, and that's probably what's happened in our society. So how do we then take up our cross in our modern day era? If what the true meaning of that statement would have invoked these feelings of being oppressed by the Roman government, or being murdered or being tortured. So how do we take up our cross? I'm not going out to look to be murdered or...
Yeah, but in a lot of other countries, that is what happens. I mean, that is the reality of it. It's not that way here anymore. But in a lot of third world countries and a lot of countries where, you have other religions that are dominant, that's all going on. In fact, I would say it happens more than it doesn't. We just happen to be lucky enough to be in this country, and there are a lot of places in Europe where you can't do that. But there's still places there where, you could get in a lot of trouble and or dead.
That's for sure. I mean, but so...
Yeah, I think not really so much about Europe, but like Southeast Asia and drug policy in some cases is very strict and stuff like that. There's not a lot of stuff I can think of in Europe where it's quite so draconian, but certainly it exists in the world.
Well, I think we as a Western church have sort of been ill-equipped to deal with suffering for the most part, in Europe. And I say the Western church, though in Europe, that's dying pretty quickly.
Well, post-USSR it is, but
Yes.
before that, I mean, for
sure.
the time before that it was.
In the modern times, Europe is on the decline as far as Christianity goes. Now, that there's a lot of immigration going on there, and other religions are coming to the forefront. I don't know, but anyway.
The smarter people get, the more they think that they know the answer instead of God. And so God usually goes away. So you look in the northeast of America where people are more educated and they're, and they become more liberal and they become more, I don't need this. Where you look in the south where folks are less educated and there's still a big belief in God. You go to South America and the people that are poor and they're looking for hope. And it's easier to... for a better word, believe when you're that, and not not think that you're in control of your own destiny.
That's true. I mean, I just was reading an article about what's going on I get Niger and Nigeria confused, but I think it's Nigeria, where they're just killing Christians. They've locked them in churches and burned them. They've beheaded them. And
I remember that church burning you're talking about. It was a couple years ago now, but it was a while. But I remember it.
About a month ago, they beheaded a bunch of Christians, and they've actually expelled all governments from their consulates. I mean, there's troops on the border from other countries. It's what's going on in Nigeria is bad, and if we hear about it at all, we kind of think that's way over there, Then we open up our social media and somebody says something on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, or Facebook, and they hurt our feelings, and we're all like up in our feels about it, and we get all upset. And why are you doing this to me? And da 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 da. And to us, that's suffering. Words hurt. They do. That's suffering. But if you ask that pastor that was being beheaded in Nigeria, would he rather have harsh words or would he rather be beheaded?
The people are relative creatures, right? Like the worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you.
Oh, yeah, that is for sure. So how can we then take up our cross, which to the disciples whom this message was meant, or for whom this message was meant, they understood that suffering and tribulation and trial and humiliation was coming. That's not necessarily a word we think of when I never really had thought about the humiliation of the cross until I started digging into this and how humiliating that must have been for a Jewish male, a white male for that instance, who would want to be put up on a cross naked in downtown Hendersonville. I mean, nobody wants to suffer that kind of humiliation, just how humiliating that would be. And to hear Jesus say, take up your cross and follow me, spoke to a whole level of dedication to following him that only certain ones of them were going to have.
Well, I think just following him in general, they had to give up everything they had to follow him. Some of them had money. Some of them fishermen. They may not have been rich, but they had their boats. They had this. They had that. Other people in the family had to take care of it to take care of their family, but they had to walk away from everything in order to do that. Plus, and I think in the time of Jesus too, that was pre-Christianity. I mean, it started with him.
Yes.
So you've got a brand new move. Can you imagine today? I mean, look at the way we look at people like Latter-day Saints and Jehovah's Witness and different things. That's something that's been around for a while, but hasn't been around for millennia. And starting that and look at what we put them through. It's just not easy to do. I mean, it's hard enough to get a kid to get up in church and say something around among his peers, let alone go out into the world and say something to somebody about Christianity. And then in countries where it's not allowed and you could get beheaded for,
or stoned or, exiled. I mean,
The Chosen brought up an interesting perspective that you mentioned, Ralph, about Jesus in his days walking around. One of the scenes, in one of the recent seasons, Christ walked into the city, and as he walked into the main gates of the city, there were several people on a cross that were being crucified right there. It's kind of interesting to imagine that any city that he walked into, he possibly could have walked past men and women, or even possibly children that were up on cross.
Oh, absolutely.
That were being crucified right then. And
all up and down the Roman roads. That's hey, here it is. And
right.
And this is what they did right up here.
Well, they didn't call it the Via Dolorosa, meaning the way of suffering, for no reason. I mean, literally, it's called that and was called that.
Well, yeah,
even
but
then.
there were roads like that all throughout Rome,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
and with writings as to what they did, whether they were a thief or what. So you could see that, and
I'm sure
Oh,
there possibly would have been innocent people the same that would have been crucified.
Yeah,
Oh, sure.
I think it was, even though I think it was easier for Christ than it was for his disciples, because Christ was preaching the good news, and people were coming to him, and he was healing people, and he was doing things, and yes, there were people in powers that didn't want him there, but the ones that really, in my opinion, and I may be off my rocker, but the ones that started Christianity after he died, all of the apostles and everybody, the ones that are out preaching this message, this is a new religion. This is a guy that was put on a cross, and they said this is a bad guy. And you're preaching, in the beginning to many Jews, and then going out of Jerusalem away from there, preaching to other people that don't know about it and aren't Jews, and it's easier to preach to them. But still, they are worshiping many gods. So they were heavily persecuted. Christ was bringing good news to people. People were flocking to see Christ. And, the disciples had to go continue that. And in many respects they did, but they were also persecuted for it because of, what happened with Christ and what the Romans eventually did to him.
I would sum that up by saying that Christ was powerful and influential in his own lifetime in a way that no single apostle was.
Absolutely.
That's definitely
Right?
And how many?
It's a different experience.
And we don't even have a number of account how many people that were crucified after, up until we talk about the big events of 70 AD, that were just literally crucified for being a believer in Christ. We know that the apostles did and died in different ways, but how many just normal people were
that we don't hear about.
that never knew about?
There's no record.
Right.
They weren't meticulous record keepers like other people
No.
who've annihilated civilizations. Well, let's see what the Bible says about suffering. So we're going to start with one of my favorite verses. It's Isaiah chapter 43, verse 2. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, nor shall the flame scorch you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. Then I'm going to skip down to verse 5. Fear not, for I am with you. Okay, so he uses 3 different words for trial there. He used waters, rivers, and fire. Water typically is a cleanser, right? We get in the shower, and hopefully, if we have clean water coming out of the spigot or the faucet or the shower head, even if we didn't have shampoo, we could manage to clean ourselves up a little bit, right? So something that can be cleansing can also be destructive, i.e., if we just had a hurricane that went through Florida, did a lot of damage, a lot of water damage. So that very same life-giving essence can be life-taking, can be damaging. And then fire, unfortunately, we've just had this horrible thing in Maui where an entire community was set on fire, and our hearts go out to them and been praying for them. But fire is also a purifier. Gold is purified through fire. You can't get to the gold without purifying
and
it first.
after a fire, everything grows again.
That's correct.
As long as it's the right kind of forest.
That is, if it's done correctly.
Yeah, if you let nature do it.
If this wasn't done correct. But all that to say is the Bible there uses something that seems very innocuous, but can be destructive. And I sometimes think when you bring me through the waters, of course, that image brings up, the Red Sea and walking through on the dry ground. And I think that happened in the Jordan one time as well. So, when you go through the waters, I will be with you. You're not alone. You don't have to go through this alone. And I think when we read some of this other scripture and we get to where I believe that the Lord wants us to hear how we suffer, because we're going to read passages that say you are going to, not you may. You are going to. This one here said, when you walk through the waters. Is that what it says? I got to put my glasses on. When you pass through the waters. Not if you pass through the waters, but when. And when you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. It's not if, it's when. So what else does the Bible say? Well, would somebody look up 1 Peter 5:10? Romans 5:3-4? 1 Peter 4:1?
But the God of all grace, who hath called us unto his eternal glory by Christ Jesus, after that ye have suffered a while, make you perfect, establish, strengthen, settle you.
Okay. After you have suffered. Not if you suffer.
A while. Suffered a while.
A while. Yeah.
Romans 5:3-4 says,
It's my favorite Bible. Second favorite Bible verse.
and not only so, but we glory in tribulations also, knowing that tribulation worketh patience, and patience experience hope.
What version are you using there?
King James.
Okay.
Not intentionally, just
No, that's okay. I mean, it gets the same point, but I had memorized it when I was in the hospital with AJ all those days. We glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance or endurance. And endurance or perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not disappoint.
I like character because I think, I keep hearing a lot of people say, turn the cheek, turn the cheek, turn the cheek. But God teaches you to fight. You have to fight to get through this stuff, and that gives you endurance to withstand other things because once you fight to get through one thing, then you have the confidence knowing that you can get through the next one and the next one and the next one, and that gives you the endurance to keep going.
I think it's important to point out there's lots of ways. There's lots of meanings to fight.
Yes.
There's more than one. Like there's a struggle, and then there's a violent altercation.
Yeah,
and they're meaningfully different things.
Definitely, and I'm definitely part of the struggle part. You got to struggle through it, fight through it, and just keep going, persevere. That's another good word, is to persevere, so that you get that endurance and that the inner peace, knowing you do it enough times, you get inner peace knowing that you can do it.
Mm-hmm. And would you say if you've been through any sort of trial or hardship or tribulation that you came out stronger on the other end if you are at the other end of that?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. And better able to deal with the next thing that comes along because A, you've learned some things, and so it's going to be easier for you to deal with it. And B, you can manage through the struggle, and so you just keep going through it and you push through it.
Did anybody look up 1 Peter 4:1?
Or 1 Peter 4:1. Therefore, since Christ has suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same purpose, because he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin.
So it's not, again, Christ suffered, we're going to suffer.
So he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin?
That's what it says.
And that,
What does it say after that, Ralph? Is there
yeah,
in context?
Context.
So as to live the rest of time in the flesh no longer for the lust of men, but for the will of God. So this may be saying if you suffer in it and you suffer through and persevere through your, let's call it an addiction. You suffer through your addiction, you can come through it on the other side knowing that you've beat it and that you can live.
And that sin is no longer
Right. It's
controlling
not
your life.
controlling
It doesn't
you.
control you anymore. It's
No,
more like
no matter what it is.
Yeah, it's more like an internal battle. If you have suffered in the flesh and have conquered your sin, per se, whatever that may be, you have self-disciplined yourself, then you no longer are a slave to it. If that makes sense.
That does make sense. I don't think it specifically says that, though.
It
At
doesn't.
the
It just
front, it
speaks
says
about-
keep fervent in your love.
It speaks about suffering. It doesn't specifically speak about having overcome the source of that suffering.
I think the overcoming would be hath ceased from sin. That would be like a overcoming.
Okay, no,
You know what I
that
mean?
makes sense.
Yeah, if you go through and read through the rest of it, it does talk about overcoming sin and being because other people are watching you and looking at you. And all this, they are surprised that you do not run with them in the same excess because you've gone through this and you've conquered yours. And the people that were either with you running before or judging you can now see a changed person.
I think some of the struggles in like verses like these, there's, for lack of a better term, there's a double context. There's an audience relevance context to that, and then there's a generalization to our application, what it would be. During that period of time, the Roman church was getting severely persecuted by the Romans. So much so that Nero was burning Christians in his courts as Roman candles. And from the context of standing that, when you have committed your life to Christ in those days, you had literally given up everything. You had given up sin because you were becoming sinless like Christ. Now, I don't believe anybody achieved it, but they were, when you were being persecuted to that degree that he got persecuted on, and you became a Christian burning it as a torch in his courts, then yes, you were done. You had given up everything.
Yeah.
And
he blamed them for the decline of the Roman Empire,
right.
or what he perceived as the decline of the Roman Empire.
And even burned.
Everybody needs a scapegoat.
Well, there you have
And
it.
you set Rome on fire, blaming the Christians for it.
And the Jews were like, "Thank God it's not us this time."
I'm sure.
Yeah, because it's usually them.
Yeah, frequently it had been.
Frequently
certainly.
it had been, yes. So then, is suffering bad?
Well, I think everyone suffers. I think it's just it's that trial by fire. You go through it to get better at everything that you have to do, and the more that you go through it, the more that the Lord's going to give you. The more you go through it, the better you get, the more you can handle.
Well, what I would say did you learn from the suffering that you were receiving or you were going through? Some people continue to suffer because they didn't learn from the last lesson.
And that would be the character that's supposed to be when you persevered, right?
In some cases, I mean, even I can speak for myself. There are some things that I've done or I've repeatedly done that may be a negative insight to myself, and I didn't learn from the last one. And we could debate, does God increase the amount of suffering till you learn not to do it? In my case, I think sometimes he has, depending on what it was I did, and I repeatedly did it until eventually it became a point where I couldn't endure it. And I'm like, wait a minute, I've got to change something because this is now getting too difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
That reminds
I
me
feel
of
like
when
a
I
lot
was
of people
kid.
work just like that.
I believe that's probably 99%
Yep.
of. Yeah.
I was a young kid, and my boss got tired of me showing up half an hour late, and he said, "You're fired." And I'm like, "What?" And a couple of days later, I came back, and he's like, "Okay, here's the deal. You get your job, but no more going out and drinking on the weekends and having to work at 6:00 on Saturday morning and showing up late. Friday nights, you got to go to bed at this time if you're going to work here." And waking up in the morning all crazy and hungover, you're like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. I got to find a better way.
Yeah.
Well, I do think suffering is bad. I mean, it's bad. It's not something that, whether we read this Bible and it tells us we're going to go through it or not, it's bad.
Oh, yeah.
Some sufferings come from our own doings, and then there are some sufferings that we don't have control
Yeah,
over.
some are inflicted on
Yeah.
you.
Some
and
come
it's
from other
bad.
people's bad doings.
Yeah, it's bad. And unfortunately, we're just left with the choice of how we're going to handle it and, whether we'll grow from it. The saying, either be bitter or you'll be better, and sometimes
Sometimes you're bitter.
yeah. So, initially you're bitter.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, you have that
After you got
emotion.
fired, you were a little bitter.
Well, I was just a kid. I understood that one, I was just 16. But I believe in the bitter and better. Most of my life has been better. Recently, something happened to me, and for about a week, I was bitter. And I realized that till I had a conversation with somebody. I'm like, ooh. And somebody...
Yeah,
and
sometimes it surprises yourself. You can surprise yourself with it.
I
Sure.
went to a family counseling session, and the lady there said, I want you to remember that this that you were doing was all for a good purpose, and don't get lost in all of the bad that happened. Like, you got to go through it and talk about it, but just kind of remember what this was all about. And I had to think, oh yeah, that's right. This was all a good thing. there was something bad that we've been talking about, but no, it was a good thing, and that really helped me.
I firmly believe, I don't think I've ever said this on the podcast, I firmly believe you are an unreliable narrator for your own life, and you don't, your problems are obvious to other people because you lack perspective.
That's
and
right.
Everybody thinks,
Because you're in it.
everybody thinks they're the captain of their own life, and I know what's best for me. Everybody thinks that. Me too. Saying this right now, I still believe that because we're built that way or whatever.
Would that be the reason why the captain goes down with the ship? Because he can't see the problem
Yeah,
around him?
he's like, no, we're fine. I'm
was not an iceberg.
I'm bailing right now. Look at me bail.
No, that's a great point, Andy. Great.
No, I think it's absolutely wonderful.
Unreliable narrator.
I
Man.
was-
We are.
So
all
you prefer
one.
the biography to the autobiography?
No, because they're both interesting in different ways, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, when I was young, I would talk to a friend of mine, and one day I was like, he's like, "What's going on?" I was like, "Yeah, I don't need to talk about it." He says, "Yeah, you do." He said, "Because what's in your mind is going to change when you say it. It bounces off of me and back into your ear, and you're going to think how stupid you are."
Yeah.
And so we went through this thing, and we started, and then there was a certain point that he just kind of looked at me like, "See, I told you," because I got it, and I'm like, Oh shit!
Absolutely,
Okay.
saying things out loud can
Right,
really help.
absolutely.
Yeah, sure
Right.
can.
So I guess it's for better understanding, biography would be from an outside perspective. An autobiography
It's self.
would be yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess if my biography would be speculative to think I'm crazy, but if I did an autobiography,
You would
know
confirm that?
without a doubt that I'm crazy.
You would confirm it. Absolutely.
So that means you're normal.
So is there a God suffering and a devil suffering?
Oh, that I didn't think
No,
about that.
that's interesting.
My next question was, Billy, does God allow suffering?
Well, I mean, if I'm Job, I'm pissed at God.
But he's not.
I know.
But he wasn't.
I know.
But if I'm
But-
Joe,
Okay,
So-
here's the thing. We are seeing Job from we're now here. Job was way back there.
Yeah.
We're seeing it from a hindsight's 2020 position. He was in the midst of it.
Yeah.
So we have the
We have
insight into the throne room where Satan was allowed to go, and where Satan, has been allowed to go for many, many years with the saints, and talk about. Did you see what so and so did? And so he's allowed. He's allowed there. So, and he goes, "Look at my servant Job."
who
If I
was
was-
it? It wasn't Satan, right? I guess it was the devil. I mean, specifically, do we remember? It's not
Yeah.
that big a deal,
It's
but it's not Satan.
It's Satan.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
a Satan,
No, it was the
Well,
capital.
it says the Satan by the author.
the Satan.
Yeah. So now again, the term in itself is an adversary. It's
Right.
a noun.
the
And
adversary,
So
Okay.
not an adversary, but
the adversary.
Okay.
If I was Job, I'd be wondering what I did wrong. Okay. What I do, and then
I'd be mad.
and then it's just
And sad.
yeah. I think at the time he was just concentrating on putting one foot in front of the other because you've got boils and this, and you've got all this thing happen, and your
Lost
kids
all your
and your
kids,
wife and
yeah.
everything
I think
he
else.
didn't lose his wife.
Yeah,
She just me.
I'm just saying
he
everything
was
that he was
upset,
having to
though.
go through. Yeah.
I
He
mean,
did cry out.
He
Didn't
did. He never cursed,
Oh, I didn't say he
God.
cried out. I just said if it were me, I'd be
But-
wondering what I did wrong.
but he did that. He did over and over again, repeatedly.
Yeah,
Question he
you're right.
asked.
He just didn't curse
Well,
God.
Yeah, he
That's
was.
good
That would
point.
be like
Good
a way of reacting.
Well,
are,
Job-
are you going to handle it and respond in the correct way, or he could have did what his wife told him and said, curse God
And all his
die.
friends.
Well, here's what's interesting is Job really didn't have a perspective of why he was going through it. He wasn't there when the conversation between Satan and
Right.
God was. He just knew he was having these problems.
Yeah.
And
That's
that
true.
his family was lost.
And he,
and
did
he was
ask
barely
why.
swimming.
And yes, and Satan said, well, if you let things happen to him, he's going to curse you. And God knew better that he wouldn't, but it was also, he never knew exactly where it was coming from. He never knew that Satan was actually putting it on him. He never knew that God allowed it. He didn't have those perspectives. Now, I can't say if he had known those, how he would have changed his outcry.
That's an interesting point.
And then God answers him when he says, "Why, God? Why
Mm-hmm.
me?" And God goes, "Where were you when I laid the foundation
Yeah.
of the earth?" Oh, okay. I
Yeah.
feel you, God. I got you. Now, and that's basically what he said. He's like, "Oh, yeah."
Because it's my house.
Is that where we
Rightly so.
get? Now, do we get? Did I lose my train of thought? Oh, nothing happens to us that doesn't go through God's hands
That's
first.
the
Is that where
perspec-
we get that perspective?
That's the
Is from
perspective
Job?
is what we get because it's the only place, and because the Satan says, I can't touch him because you've got him protected. And we've been told that from a Christian's perspective, belief in Christ is you're protected away from all of evil, all of
right,
sin.
but you're not protected from death and those other things. What you're protected from is everlasting life.
Well, you're protected from Satan's ability to affect your life.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Your everlasting life.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah,
Ralph's
yeah.
right.
He cannot affect your eternal life.
But he sure can cause
But I think
chaos, havoc, and
obviously
misery.
He could have external things come at you and affect you.
Well, that's kind of the question she was asking or stating. Where did we get it from? That can Satan affect you with the pretense that the only way he can do it, does God allow it?
yes.
So, and that's saying that's where we get it from.
But that's you're at that slippery slope of chicken
God-
and the egg,
yeah.
or
Did God create evil?
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's
Where-
exactly
the
problem there.
It's not God didn't create evil. It's God gave us free will.
Well, he-
That's the thing. We have a brain. We have free
I
will.
do think he
But he
created
did.
it.
Oh boy, that's a whole nother.
Well, where did-
Right,
podcast.
because
So
it says he
that's
created
another-
all things.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
But when did Satan turn? And did he personally say, "Okay, good. I'm going to have him do this. I don't think he had Satan. I don't think he created Satan to betray him. I think that he allowed Satan the ability
to have free will to do it.
Which is interesting because I didn't think the holy, what do they call it? Not the holy, is it the holy host? The
Holy
holy
Trinity?
host? No, the angels.
The heavenly host.
Heavenly. I didn't think the heavenly host had free will, actually. So that's pretty interesting to me.
Maybe I have to do. Somebody needs to do a
That was just
podcast on
man.
that.
The
God will versus our will.
Well, the heavenly host.
Does the heavenly host have a free will?
Yeah.
There is David Curtis does a on his BereanBibleChurch.org. He does do the heavenly court discussion about those and the heavenly court and their role. And he does give them. It's interesting if you get in. And again, you're the speculation of where did the apocryphal books land? Like the Book of Enoch talks about some of those that were the fallen angels and their ability to do things. It doesn't get into depths whether or not God allowed them to do it or whether they did it on their own free will.
If God didn't allow them to do it, they wouldn't have done it. We wouldn't be here.
Well, again, that's
And like again, we're just
huge
we're
debate.
at that slippery slope.
Yeah.
We're on the
Huge.
knife's edge, the razor's edge,
So
the chicken
let's
and the
not
egg.
slide down that.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
So there. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You can't have a hero without a villain.
It's true. That is true.
And I mean, I think Andy made a good point at the Judas podcast where he was asking us all if we believe that God sent Judas. Well, they had to be a Judas.
Oh yeah. Without
So
a
I
doubt.
think Andy was challenging all of us like, well, if this is part of God's plan, then is our story already told?
Yeah, but that gets to that gets to that point of are we going to already do everything that the
Yeah.
Lord knows we're going to do? And if so, then I don't want to be here and I don't want to worship Him.
Well, we get in those debates about the preterist view and the Calvinistic view, and from the script of the Bible's role, and it's kind of an agreement to a Calvinistic thing where everything was predestined and written in history.
Yeah.
It was going to play
too
out.
much man. Too much man.
So you, to some extent, there can be a discussion made that yes, was it written in a certain way to happen in a certain way? Yes, for an ultimate goal of the redemption that would come through Christ and the redemption He did to the people, to the world, and everything that we get to enjoy today. So to some of that, I would agree, yes, that it did. But today, that's where the huge amount of discussion can be made. What about now? What about, yes, we can agree that we can see in history that seems that everything played out for a reason. Even our lives we can look at today and say, yes, this stuff happened for a reason for right now. I went through this in my life that benefited me now. I didn't see it then, but I see it now. And you can almost say, is it written in a particular way? Yeah, I guess you could, but
Well, the Bible, the Christ's words in the Bible was written for the people in that day for what they were going through.
Right.
What would it say today if Christ was here and the Bible was written today?
Did y'all, when you were little,
writing our own story.
have those books where you could choose
Oh, yeah,
an
choose
ending?
literature.
Yes.
That's kind of what I feel like
Awesome.
life is. We get to choose. So we come to what is it? Emerson's Fork in the Road.
Yeah.
Who was it?
I'm
not
not-
Emerson.
I'm not sure about that.
Ralph Waldo. Didn't he write? If you come to a fork.
Well, there's that and then the one less traveled. So
Yeah,
there's
the one
two
less-
of them.
How many times did you read it and go back down the same path?
I know.
No
I went
matter
back down.
trying to change it, and you
I
still
like
went down
backed
the.
up.
Well, you
and then
went-
went back down and then backed up. And then
Well,
went back
because
down.
people go
Now,
where
to
where
be
it's
fair,
comfortable.
you didn't
because
go down the same path. You just landed at the same ending.
Right.
But you didn't go down the same path. You just
But you
landed
tr-
at the same ending.
Right, but you're trying to find a different ending.
Yeah.
You're trying, but you still end up
Is the definition of insanity doing the same thing, expecting a different outcome? Yeah.
pretty much.
So there are
That's why I stopped reading.
there are there are so many examples in the Bible of people who suffered, and here's just a short list of people that I composed: Moses, his mom, the Hebrews that were there at that time. The Israelites in general suffered quite a bit, most of the time of their own doing, complaining like I want to do. Lord, please, why am I doing? I hate this. Just don't do this. I mean, Tamar, she was raped. That's suffering. Ruth lost her husband, moved out of country.
Lost her sons.
She did meet a pretty hot guy named Boaz and become the mother of the lineage of Jesus. So that's pretty cool. Job, we talked about him. David, read the Psalms. If he didn't suffer, the Psalms, I mean, how many times we read the Psalm and got comfort knowing that someone, and we think of these people as these heroes for us of the Bible. They were just regular people. They were just schmoes going to work.
Most heroes are regular people who were in a situation that said yes and. Mm-hmm. You know, they just like, okay, this is there's a brick wall in front of me, and I can either go back or I can go forward. And most of those people had an army behind them that was coming after them, so they had no choice but to go forward, which is why so many people in all these wars say, you know, this medal isn't for me, it's for the guys that we left on the battlefield, because this guy went up and did this either because his sergeant said to do it, and sergeant's going to go do it or else, or it's like, my buddy's there, so I've got to go do it, or, hey, we've been encircled, and the only way out is for us all to get together and charge up that hill.
Let's see. Paul, Peter, John. Who else you got?
Abel.
Oh, he suffered. Yep.
Abel is the first person that I can recall of in the Bible to suffer by an external factor, by no cause of his own.
And thus Adam and Eve. And then Cain also suffered from it. Yep. So and I left off Joseph because I wanted to leave him for last. Joseph suffered in a massive way many times. And then he writes in Genesis 50:20, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today."
And that's another one, the suffering where it's kind of scripted in such a way that it just landed perfectly for an ultimate goal. And you kind of, I heard a guy discuss about, does God have free will? And from his perspective, which is very interesting and can be open debate, if God has his heart for something to be set out and planned, then actually sort of no, he doesn't have a free will in that point. Because whatever he's set in his heart to be set, he's going to follow the plan until it's achieved.
Well, that what you just quoted from Joseph is the first time as a kid I understood grace. Mm-hmm. Because this is your family that did this to you.
Listen, I learned it from the VeggieTales. I really did. I didn't know that. And I went to look that scripture up and I was like, oh, I love that. I love that thought. But then Paul reiterates it in Romans 8:28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for the good of those who are called according to his purpose. That's a similar statement to what Joseph said. All things, the bad, the good, the meh, just the mundane, everyday.
Everyone's going to have a trial, and the Lord is allowing you to grow to meet those. And so you know, I've always said that one of the things I fear is meeting God and being shown the things I didn't do. And this is part of that. Because the Lord's going to say, I put these things in front of you, and some of them that you didn't learn from, which means that you weren't strong enough when I had this that needed to be done. So I had to give it to someone else, and it didn't quite turn out as well as I would have.
Sounds like you're saying God is setting traps for you.
No.
Perfect ideology.
I don't think that's what he's doing. I think he's giving me opportunities to grow. When you're at work, as a boss, I give people jobs to do, and they do them or they don't, and they excel or they don't.
The
and then
difference
they get promoted
between
or
those
they don't.
two things is the clarity of direction. When you're a boss and you give somebody to do, you are doing so with clarity, or you're terrible boss. With God, these things are different. You're suggesting that somebody just like appears in your life, and you personally have to make the decision. It's not a good parallel.
No, I disagree.
I think
that people do.
Yeah,
I disagree because I think that part of the learning is learning to listen, and being in the Word and being in God. And the more you're in the Word and in God, the more you can understand and see these things coming. Because if you're not, and you're off doing your own thing, then you miss some of the signs that come along that could have taken you somewhere else.
I think you're putting yourself in a lot of turmoil that you probably don't deserve.
I don't have any turmoil over it. I just think that's...
You bring it up often. You clearly have turmoil over it. Yeah, you're putting yourself in turmoil that you probably do not deserve.
And that brings me to
the turmoil.
That brings me to my last point of this particular episode is we shouldn't seek out suffering. And to me, that's almost an anxiety-driven thing.
That's a good point.
We shouldn't seek out suffering because it's going to happen. regardless. And I just don't believe, and this is a personal belief, I don't believe we get to heaven or wherever it is that we encounter God and he sits us down with a DVD player and says, here's the DVD of all the mistakes or the near misses that you had, and here's a mistake of all the triumphs that you had. It's not going to be about that. It's going to be about worshiping him in ad infinitum forever.
Well, I understand that, but what I believe is that when I get there, I'll have the knowledge of what I did, and for me, I just don't want to, hear about all the things that I missed.
Right, but we're all failures by definition.
Absolutely.
In this faith,
I don't lose sleep over it.
People,
it pushes me to be better.
You're not
more.
expected to be perfect. You're just expected to do as good as you can.
I agree.
And of course, worship Jesus in this particular example.
So, if we shouldn't seek out suffering, what should we do? We should prepare for how to endure it. Jesus didn't seek out suffering. It kind of just happened because he was so revolutionary. It happened wherever he went. People mocked him. People threw things at him. People worshipped him. Satan tried to get him in the desert a couple of times, using his own words against him, which I think is just absolutely one of the most hilarious things ever, that, he's using Jesus' very own words against him, or trying to. We don't endure like that a lot of times. Like I said before, we're in a society where you said something ugly about my picture, my selfie that I posted on Facebook, and it hurt my feelings. And a lot of times I don't think that we're capable, and I'm saying we as a collective, not we as people in this room. Just look at the amount of suicide attempts. Look at the amount of drug use, alcoholism, promiscuity, masking. Listen, I was miserable after my abortion, and I've told that testimony here, and y'all have heard it. I masked it. I masked that suffering with alcohol, with promiscuity, smoking, partying, until I couldn't do it anymore, until I couldn't mask it anymore. And I think a lot of people who've had situations where they have suffered a great deal in their lives, that's a very common thing, that they mask it somehow. They push it down and push it down and push it down until the volcano erupts. And so, since I knew there was going to be a part 2, the next time we do this, and I don't know when that'll be, but the next time we do this, I'd like to talk about some of the Bible characters who did endure through suffering. Those who did it well and those who didn't do it so well, and see where we are and what we can learn from that. And then talk about the way Jesus endured. And if we're to endure as he endured, then what does that look like?
Well, I agree with you about people pushing it down, and I would...
That was such a nice wrap-up. I just want to say that.
Go ahead.
No, I'm done. I was finished.
No, I was just going to say, I believe that. I was just going to, the message for people out there is, at a certain point, you're going to need to talk to somebody.
Yes.
You're going to need to do something. It's good to take things on you and take on the cross and do this. But at a certain point, you've got to, remember that the oxygen mask comes down, and you've got to
put it on first
so that
yes.
you can help the next one. So it's good to sometimes take that breather.
Yeah.
Remember while you're taking it all on yourself to make sure that you're getting what you need to.
That is correct. And with that, we will end. So I want to say thank you to Cherry.
Thank you, Sarita.
Thank you, Billy.
Yeah, good job.
That was a good discussion.
Good job.
It didn't go exactly the way I planned it,
Good
but
questions.
when does it ever?
The best ones always don't.
Rick Carter,
Oh, yeah.
thanks for driving up here behind me because I was here first. Ralph,
Represent.
and Andy.
Hey,
I think I see Rick in the background.
he apparated.
Oh, okay. Well, that's all for today. Thank you from the Burros of Berea.
And we'll see you next
Peace out.
time.
Nah. Who's going to do the
Later.
click? There you go.
Bye, y'all.
Hey guys, this is Rick from the Burros of Berea. Do you know how much blood, sweat, and tears it takes to make a podcast? None. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't cost a lot. And so if you guys don't mind, if anybody would like to give to help us with these episodes, it would be great. We'll put out even more content. And if you go to our Patreon page, just search for the Burros of Berea, you'll get extra notes, extra episodes, and it's pretty much free. $1 gets you a lot. Thanks, guys.
And Google wants me to sign in all the time, and I just say, stay signed out. Stay the heck out of my business.
Oh, they're following you all the same.
Oh,
What do you
I
think?
know.
Do you think that?
Don't think I haven't unplugged two of the speakers in my house. There's one in my bedroom. It's unplugged until I want to listen.
Oh, the Alexas?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
every now and then it'll start talking, and I'll say, yeah, we're not playing that. And then, you'll be talking about something, and a couple hours later you get this ad. I'm like, I know I wasn't online today.
Oh, yeah, they know. They know all about you, Ralph.
Good for them.
I didn't sync it, so it didn't keep it, I don't think. Oh, well, that's too bad. So sad. I had some good Bible verses on there, too. So,
I'm going to shut my front door.
oh, shut the front door.
Shut your front door.
Okay.
I'd probably shut the back one.
Whoa.
Exit only.
I don't know if anybody has their Bible apps or Bibles open, or I have my actual Bible.
Which in the South, the back door is basically the front door anyway.
Ugh.
Nobody
Wait,
uses it.
what?
I don't know about all that now.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the house. Home.
I was like, wait.
Home
what?
related. I thought you clarify. Home related.
You're further south than we
Yeah.
are, so I was a little worried about
Yeah.
you.
That's not prison lingo. That's
I'm going to need
at
a
my
picture
house.
of that.